I'll look at my pitch and I'll be like, could the journalist write this story in 15 minutes just using my... And in reality, sure, journalists probably have longer than 15 minutes to write their stories, but like that's a good thing to aim for. And I think like sometimes I've even gone so far as to actually try it. So like take my pitch and go, right, I'm going to turn this into a story, 15 minutes, go. And
I like that. Yeah.
wherever I get stuck, that tells me, oh, this is something the journalists need, right?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BuzzStream podcast. My name is Vince Nero, the Director of Content Marketing here, and I am thrilled to welcome our guest, Hannah Smith, Wordist. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so I want to jump right in because we just had a great chat about a week ago, I think. I had joined you and Britt Klontz. I think it was like a joint We Earn Media, Vada Communications, and Wordist kind of joint podcast, or webinar, I'm sorry, that you did with Serena Shande. And she's a journalist, former PR, where you really got into this idea of personalization in your pitching specifically. When do you personalize? Is it necessary? When is it? When isn't it? Let's just start right there. Let's get your thoughts on personalization in general, then we can kind of dig a little deeper.
Yeah. So it really depends on what you mean by personalization, doesn't it, ultimately? So I think when I hear personalization, what I'm really thinking about is like one-to-one personalization. So for example, in the past, I've definitely seen advice like, if you are pitching a journalist, you should mention or reference some specific articles that journalist that you're emailing has written. And I feel strongly that that's not necessary for a bunch of reasons, right? Firstly, I just don't believe that journalists are that interested in hearing that you've read or that you loved a bunch of their articles. Do you know what I mean? Like, it can sound a bit insincere, I think, as part of the problem. It can kind of feel like a bit of an empty statement. But also, I think that you're potentially plugging up your pitch with fluff, right? So journalists are incredibly time poor. Their inboxes are flooded. What they really need to know is, what is the story that you are pitching? That's what they need to know. And they need to know that as quickly as possible. And I think that they are more than capable of reading your pitch and determining whether or not the story is a good fit for them and their beat. And so I just think it's I think it's unnecessary. I think it's kind of a waste of time because it's incredibly time consuming, right? If I'm pitching 100 journalists, I spend 15 minutes finding articles for each of them. That's 25 hours work. Probably not the best way to spend my time, I would argue. I think it's incredibly easy to get wrong as well. So it's very easy to say something like, I recently read your article on this topic, and so I thought you'd love this pitch, which I'm about to tell you all about. And in the journalist's head, they may not think the two things are similar. So I might see an article about a particular topic and go, oh, that's just like this thing I want to pitch you. And the journalist might feel like, do you know what? Those two things aren't the same. And now I'm sort of annoyed by you, Hannah. I'm just kind of turned off, and I don't want to read the rest of your pitch. So I don't like, personally, I think, and maybe I worry about this too much, I try to avoid alienating journalists. And I think it's one of the ways, unfortunately, you can alienate them by accident. So even if you do your research really, really well, you could still get it wrong, ultimately. And so I think that's why it's something that I personally don't do. There are instances when I would personalize a pitch. So, for example, and I'll be honest, like I don't do a ton of this, but if I was pitching, say, one of the experts that I worked with to appear on like a TV show or to appear on a podcast or something like that, then I would send like a fully personalized pitch. Do you know what I mean? That would be a one-on-one interaction with the podcaster or broadcaster, right? And I guess in a similar vein, when we are responding to requests from journalists for expert commentary, so lots of people use it used to be called Tarot, now it's called Connectively, I think, or Quoted, or just responding to stuff on like journo request on Twitter, anything like that. That would be entirely personalized. That would be one-to-one. So I would specifically seek to answer the specific things that the journalist has requested. But yeah, the kind of the pitches where I guess like the stories where I'm pitching a number of journalists, essentially the same story, I don't think you need to take the time to personalize. You need to make sure the story is relevant for them. And I'm guessing we'll get into that a bit more later, but I don't think you need to personalize.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question there, because I think one of the things you and I talked about prior to this podcast was a muckrack study that we saw.
Yeah.
And, I'm not here to say anything negative about, any of this, but I think what was kind of confusing for me on my side and what I wanted to kind of seek clarity with you is this study found, and I can link to this in the show notes, it found that quote unquote lack of personalization was one of the main things that caused journalists to reject pitches. So it sounds to me, based on what you last said, that maybe there's just that the wording here is the difference here. Maybe what they mean is lack of relevance and not actually personalization.
Yeah, and similarly to you, like I don't want to like cast aspersions on the muckrack study. I just think potentially what happened there, I think conceivably it could have been a semantic issue. So journalists are saying lack of personalization. And bear in mind, with most of these surveys, it's like a box ticking thing. So maybe personalization was an option and relevance wasn't, conceivably. I mean, I don't know that that's true, right?
Yeah, and it's not just muckrack. We're saying like
no,
this
it happens a lot.
Kind of universal in the industry. Like people say personalization when I think what they really mean is probably relevance.
Yeah, and like that's what I am guessing is probably going on. I think the main reason journalists will reject pitches is just that they're irrelevant to their beat, and it's not really so much about personalization. However, I could definitely imagine that some journalists would consider relevance and personalization to be the same thing. Do you know what I mean? So they kind of feel like, well, if you're sending me something that's irrelevant to my beat, this is not a personalized email. Do you know what I mean? Like that's also fair.
Right.
Semantically, it's fair. And I suppose like maybe I'm keen to reference Serena because she is a journalist. And something that she said on the webinar, she said, saying that you loved 10 of my last articles or whatever makes no difference at all. I can only cover a story if it's well-researched, a good fit for my desk in terms of what we cover. What I care most about is page views. If it's not going to get me views, I can't put the time into writing an article. The personalization isn't important in my opinion, but sending pitches which are relevant to my beat really is. And I suspect that many other journalists feel similarly to Serena, maybe.
Yeah. And that was, I think it's well put by Serena there for sure, because there's like two parts of that, like kind of standard personalization. I feel like there's the tactic of like, hey, you wrote this piece, so I thought you'd be interested in this piece. And the way I would always do outreach was like, we never had media lists that we'd use. So like I was very post focused, like I would look at the backlinks for a very similar post and look at the journals that covered that. So I would, pitch if it was a post on, the most ticketed cars or something, I would look at people who had written about posts about cars, the fastest cars or whatever. It was kind of like that, hey, since you covered this, like you're going to want to cover this, right? Like a heavy implication. But the thing that I would always kind of say that we didn't need, like when I was training our team, it would be like that line about, since you cover the car industry a lot, like I think if you have to say that, you're not doing your job of like, it's like, that's so obvious that like, if you have to say it, then you're probably not doing your job. If time is an issue, for sure, cut it out, like go right to the pitch. And to your point, like going right to the pitch is the best solution, where it's like adding that little extra probably can't hurt, like that little connection point, since you covered this specific post. It probably can't hurt, but it's just going to take that much more time. And that was one of the downfalls of
I suppose,
the pitfalls, I'd say.
Definitely. I mean, and again, like it really depends on your perspective, right? As I say, like I feel that, and perhaps this is something I worry about too much. I feel like it's potentially a bit patronizing is kind of why is like the other reason I don't like it. Like the journalist knows what articles they wrote them. Like, do you know what I mean? Like they don't need you to tell them that. And again, I do think that like, sometimes, and again, this is just my like personal point of view, but I think that sometimes people think they need to like sell the story in inverted commas more than they actually do. Like, because I just don't think that I understand that kind of, I think a lot of this comes from things like, I don't know, maybe people have read a bunch of books about the art of persuasion and they're like, what I'm doing here is persuading the journalist. But I'm like, well, in my experience, journalists are so time poor, right? They don't need to be persuaded. What they need to understand as quickly and easily as possible is what is the story that you're giving them, and kind of just let them figure the rest out for themselves, because they're more than, like I say, my experience is they're more than capable of doing that. And as I say, like I do think the downside, which isn't talked about very much, is the extent to which like this can be a potential panel as well. As I say, it's much easier to get wrong than get right. And I say so because I've seen it myself. So like I've seen one of the I guess benefit of being a kind of freelance consultant. I've read an awful lot of people's pitches. And actually this personalization bit is the bit they most commonly get wrong. Like I see it and I'm like, these two things are not the same. Like, don't be saying to this journalist, you should cover my piece because you wrote about this piece one. Like these two things aren't the same. And again, like, sure, maybe the journalist would just ignore that statement. Maybe it wouldn't hurt at all. I don't know. But I'm just like, yeah, I just sort of feel a bit, I don't know, it just sort of makes me feel a bit icky. And I'm just like, yeah. So yeah, personal preference. Yeah. I do think there's a personal preference in there as well.
I think you're doing a great job of convincing me that my work was probably for nothing.
that was not my intention. That's not my intention. But I do like the idea of saving people time in the future. So if I'm saving people time in the future, then I'm into it.
Yeah, no. I just joking there. But this is a good segue, because one of the things you touched on there is just this idea of the story has to be there. Like that is ultimately the most important thing. So can you speak to, in these years of consulting or pitching that you've done and creating, like, what do you think makes a good story pitchable? What is enough to not need that personalization? Not, like what is it that really makes this stand out that's going to make a journalist be like, this is the study for me?
Yeah. So I'm going to fall back a bit to relevance again, right? Because I think that a lot of people, and I've worked with a lot of people who have very good intention, but it doesn't matter how good their intentions are when their energies are misdirected. So for example, lots of the people that I work with, they'll be like, I need you to create a killer pitch template for me, like an amazing press pitch template. And they think that if I can create them this magical press pitch template, all of their problems will be solved. And I'm just like, yeah, that's not going to work. Like I can make you a press pitch template if it will make, if that will give you some comfort or if that will make you happy. But like there are still so many ways you can get this stuff wrong. And I think the most common way actually is that, people will send the most beautifully constructed pitch, but essentially to the wrong person. So, if I may, because I've just written an article for you, I thought it might be fun to kind of give some concrete examples. So, obviously, in the article I just wrote for you, I spend a bunch of time talking about what our approach to pitching a piece called On Location was. So On Location was a piece we created at Bird Search. And we dug through, I don't know how many years, several decades worth of IMDb data in order to uncover the most filmed locations on the planet. And within that post, one of the kind of core angles we identified were just the top 10 most filmed locations worldwide. And I wrote up that pitch. It's in the post. People can look at it if they want. And, I'm biased, but I feel like that was a pretty good pitch. So that most filmed locations worldwide pitch is pretty strong. But here's the problem. If I'd have sent that very strong, here are the most filmed locations worldwide pitch to Madeline Moore at the Miami Herald, she would have ignored it. Doesn't matter how great the pitch is, because she doesn't cover worldwide stories. She only covers stories specific to her region. So if I want her to write up my story, I need to create a pitch about the most filmed location in Florida. And until I send her that, she will ignore me. And rightly so, and be annoyed with me for even kind of, polluting her inbox. Because it genuinely is. I'm just polluting her inbox at this point. Now, of course, this pitch about the most filmed locations in Florida, that won't just go to her. I'll actually send it to a bunch of other journalists who also work at other regional publications in Florida too. So this isn't a personalized pitch, right? It's just a relevant pitch for this segment of journalists. And I think that really, for me, that's what makes the good pitch. Like, it's relevant for that subset of journalists. So you don't have to go to the extent, I don't think, of making this a one-to-one exercise. So it's not the case that every single journalist you contact needs a unique pitch. Instead, what you need to do is segment your journalists sensibly so that you're sending segments of them the most appropriate pitch for that. That's the thing I think that people often miss. I'll also probably, I'm going to lean on Serena again, because I prefer her words to mine. So something she said about pitching, which I thought was really, really interesting, really relevant. She was like, think about your pitch structure and what you're including. Give me the story in the first line. Tell me how and where you sourced your data if it's a data feed. Give me expert quote. Provide images if you can. Keep everything in the body of the email. Don't send me attachments. Provide Dropbox or Google Drive links so we can download things like full data or images. And I think it is bearing in mind things like that. So the other space where I feel like people sometimes go wrong is they're not giving the journalist everything they need to write their story. And I think that, again, journalists are just under such incredible time pressure and I think a lot of people don't really realize the extent to which this pressure is real, right? They're expected to write maybe anywhere between 6 to 8 articles in a shift. Their whole shift isn't spent just writing articles. They've got to go to editorial meetings and they've got to do other stuff in their day as well. So a nice rule of thumb, which I tend to try and just keep in my head, is I'll look at my pitch and I'll be like, could the journalist write this story in 15 minutes just using my... And in reality, sure, journalists probably have longer than 15 minutes to write their stories, but that's a good thing to aim for. And I think sometimes I've even gone so far as to actually try it. So take my pitch and go, right, I'm going to turn this into a story, 15 minutes, go. And
I like that, yeah.
Wherever I get stuck, that tells me, oh, this is something the journalists need, right? So if I get, a paragraph or two in and I'm suddenly Googling, trying to find, I don't know, some sort of stat or some sort of other reliable bit of research into this thing, I'm like, oh, I need to reference that in my email then. I need to let the journalist know about that. And similarly, if I suddenly find myself referencing a recent news story in relation to the story I'm writing up, I'm like, oh, I need to reference that in my pitch as well. So I do think that kind of things like that. But I mean, I guess probably one thing I do want to point out, somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago, should we write the story for the journalist and send them that? And my answer was absolutely not. Wow. Absolutely not. Yeah. But I can understand why it sounds like I'm saying you should. Again, I feel like that would be really rude, right? Here you go. I've written your story for you because I know you're busy. No, I'm not suggesting that.
Right.
Give them everything they need to write their own story. Don't actually write the story for them. But yeah, that's probably worth quite like.
Yeah, that is really great advice. I love that idea of thinking from the end result. And actually you, like, as a practice, obviously not like truly pitching this, but like writing the pitch, that's a great practice to at least train yourself how to write better pitches and make sure you're including everything. I really like that. We used to talk a lot about starting the content ideation, before you're doing anything, with the pitch in mind.
Yeah.
What's the headline you wish to get? Like, even if you're not even pitching your journalist, like maybe this is like a link building campaign or something. Any article, any type of post that you write, you should always have that principle that's telling you, like, what is making this unique? Why is this better than what everybody else is doing? Like having that in mind from the get-go, I think just makes everything that much stronger. And then when you do go to pitch it, you just have that, ready at your fingertips. You can kind of craft the post and the study or whatever you're working on with that in mind as well.
Definitely. And I think, I can't remember who referred to it like this. Somebody, I'm such a terrible human. Somebody referred to this idea almost like as a North Star. So like having a North Star. So you're like, this is the piece I'm making and this is directionally like where I want to go. Some things might change along the way. As a person who has created a lot of PR campaigns over time, I know how much they change. But the idea of returning to this original intention, this original like North Star idea, can be really helpful throughout the process, right? Because stuff goes a long way from like the point at which you ideate to the point in which you have the finished thing, whatever that is, whether it's a blog post, and you can lose your way really easily. And so I think it's really important to kind of have those guiding principles and refer back to them frequently. So you're like, are we still doing the thing that we said we were setting out to do, or have we gone wildly off track? And sometimes going wildly off track is the right thing, right? Like sometimes that might be absolutely the thing to do, but not if you're just doing it by accident and a lost track.
Like you have to, as long as you've shifted to another better North Star.
Yes. Yeah. And there the whole metaphor falls apart because we have many North Stars, or just one last time I checked.
Too many stars. Yeah. I was just speaking to Will Hobson from Rise at 7 the other day, and he said something similar. And it was this idea of kind of fighting for your story, fighting to like keep your story intact. I really like that as well.
Do you know what? I honestly thought you were going to say Will Hobson mentioned North Stars, in which case I was going to say, I stole it from Will. That's what happened there. And I was going to say, that's so great. Maybe I did.
I could have misremembered, but I like that idea of kind of fighting for the story, fighting for your North Star. Put it all together.
Yeah.
At Siege Media, when I, would do pitches, and we had the same person kind of ideating, then writing, creating, championing the content all the way through, and then also doing the outreach. I really like that approach because for that same, idea, it's like you have that North Star, you know what this idea is about, you can craft the content in a specific way. I feel like, even if you have a secondary person, maybe there's two teams doing the outreach and creation, how do you ensure that the outreach team kind of captures the essence of these stories? How's this going to stand out from all the other great stories the journal's getting?
I mean, I think so. I feel like there's kind of maybe two parts to the question. So in terms of like fighting for the idea, I'm going with Will Hobson's fighting for the idea or North Star thing. And the way we handled it at Verve, so obviously we had quite a big team of people at Verve. We had a team of PR folk, and then also we had a production team who were largely responsible for the content creation. But the PR team would come up with the ideas. It would then go into the production team to be produced. Then it comes back to the PR team for the outreach to journalists phase. Obviously, it's not But it's certainly for us, it wasn't going to be scalable to be like a one person, one idea kind of a vibe. So what we tended to do, or what I instituted at a certain point as the team grew and we were producing an awful lot and everything felt a bit like, oh my goodness, there's an awful lot going on. Every campaign had what I referred to as like a PR lead. So there was a PR lead, and then there was also a creative lead. And so the PR lead on the campaign, their job is to ensure that from a PR perspective, this thing is going to retain the resonant, or like be resonant, as resonant as possible, and also retain the breadth of appeal that we originally were kind of shooting for, I guess. So that's the PR lead job. And then the creative lead's job is kind of like creative and production excellence. So it's like the PR lead's job is to make sure that we're ultimately creating a thing which will be of interest to journalists. And the creative lead's job is to ensure that the thing we're making is creatively excellent. Do you know what I mean? Because I do think that sometimes those two things can fight. And I think part of the reason that those two things wind up fighting is you never have as much resource or budget as you would really like. So inevitably, when you kind of come up with an idea, it will almost always be like bigger and more encompassing than the eventual idea winds up being, because you run out of time, you run out of budget. And so basically what the kind of the creative lead and the PR lead were kind of there to do is really work together to be like, okay, we've got to drop some elements of this idea. It can't be the thing that we really hoped it would be. So which of these elements are like likely to be the least interesting to press? So which of these angles or stories can we legitimately drop and still have a piece which is likely to be of interest to journalists? I think the other reason why that's important is, as I said, these things rarely work out the way you'd hope, right? So any data-led piece is by its nature risky, because until you analyze the data, you don't know what the stories are. So you're going in and you're like, we're going to do this data analysis and we are hoping that it's going to give us all of these stories. Then you do the data analysis and you're like, oh, we were hoping for like 10 stories coming out of this and we're actually now sitting on 2. What do we do? What do we do? And again, like that's sort of where the PR lead would come in and be like, okay, right, what other stories can we create with this? What else needs to be like in the piece? So yeah, so there's kind of, that was part 1, and I've now lost track of part 2 of the question. What was part 2 of the question?
The part 2 was kind of like, how do you make sure that the pitch kind of stands out, like the idea itself? And maybe this is more in the PR lead at the ideation phase, but like, what I'm getting at is like, what makes a story unique? What makes a story pitchable? Because to your point, like you can do everything. You can nail the media, the pitch, you can nail the targeting. But like there's chances are these journalists are also still getting 100 emails a day, 100 great pitches, maybe, you know? So like how does your pitch stand out? How does your idea and story stand out? What elements are important to a shareable story?
Yeah. So I tend to think about ideas, I don't know, in terms of like, how do we decide which ideas we're going to make? Like which ideas are we actually going to progress? I tend to think about 3 core things. So the first one is resonance. And resonance kind of encompasses a bunch of things. Resonance is a bit about, I mean, strictly speaking, resonance means like the power to provoke an emotional response. Like that's what I mean by resonance. But I think sometimes like there are, depending on the client, depending on, you know, the topic, some things are necessarily more resonant than others. So like perhaps a nice example is back when I was at Verve, we did a piece called Highways to Hell, which was where we looked at a whole bunch of publicly available data sources in order to determine where were the most congested roads in the UK. Now, this is a story which I think has reasonably high resonance, because if you drive, you care about traffic because it's frustrating to be stuck in traffic. even if you don't drive, you probably still care about traffic because you're stuck on a bus in the traffic. Like traffic is a thing that affects an awful lot of people. Also, I don't know if this is a typical British trait or not, but certainly like us Brits, there are two things we love to moan about: traffic and weather. Like we never tire of moaning about those things. So whilst this is a topic, like where are the most congested roads, on the face of it as a topic, I can understand people thinking, well, that doesn't sound very like exciting. Like I'm not very excited by this idea. But I think it's important to know the difference between exciting and resonant. So I don't care so much about exciting. I care a lot about resonance. So I care a lot about things which other people care a lot about. And particularly, I'm interested in I refer to them as like hot emotion. So anything that makes people really angry as a PR, I am so interested in. You just thinking something is cool or interesting is probably not enough. There's not enough heat in that emotion. Yeah. Like it's the things which I think about in terms of resonance are things like that. So it's not necessarily that the idea needs to be exciting, but it does need to be about a resonant topic. The other direction where I think about, the other thing I think about is what I refer to as breadth of appeal. And breadth of appeal just means the total pool of journalists we can take this to. And so in terms of breadth of appeal, this story had reasonable breadth of appeal because I've got a national story for the national journalists. I've got a story for every single region because I can tell them, these are the worst roads in Manchester. Like I can go down to that granular level. So it has reasonable breadth of appeal too. So because of that, I will be potentially reasonably confident in this idea. And I think you can use these two factors, resonance and breadth of appeal, can be a useful way of kind of thinking a little bit more critically about ideas. Because I do think that one of the challenges is, and it's a challenge for all creative people ever, right? We fall in love with our own ideas. So there'll be an idea that we're really personally interested in. And it that clouds our judgment sometimes because for us, we're like, this is so interesting. This is perhaps the best idea I've ever had. And we're so caught up in our excitement for the idea, we forget to think about, wait, what about this resonant thing? How many people does this really affect? It's just affecting me at the moment. That's not necessarily going to be strongly resonant. And again, breadth of appeal. How many journalists can I take this story to? How many journalists are actually writing about this topic right now? What are they writing about this topic? What are they writing about when they write about this topic? How does this thing I'm making feed in or enrich the stories they're already writing? And so, yeah, that's kind of my approach to evaluating ideas.
Yeah. We used to talk about outreach markets, right?
Sure.
What are the specific markets that you can break it into? And then the resonance is, kind of the emotional hook of it all. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about was you wrote recently on your blog about the idea of you call it assetless content and content-led. So assetless pitching and content-led pitching. I'd love to hear just kind of you speak to kind of the differences between the two, types of content, but then specifically how do they differ in the pitch?
Sure. So assetless digital PR, what I mean by that, literally only a press release or media pitch is created. So there's nothing live on the client site that a journalist could link to. Often, but not always, this is a reactive digital PR activity or a newsjack. In the bad old days, we used to call them newsjacks. I don't think they call them newsjacks anymore. I think they call it reactive PR. That's fine. We can call these things whatever people want to call them. It doesn't matter.
The terminology is all over the place nowadays, I think.
Yeah. And I'm just showing my age by using terms like newsjack. So that's good.
People say newsjack.
So yeah, that's what I mean by assetless. Quite literally, there's no asset live on the client site. So then on the other hand, you've got some people call it hero or content-led digital PR. And the difference is just that something is created that a journalist could link to on the client side. So for my money, that could be anything from a blog post. Like it doesn't need to be like a big, expensive, flashy thing. It could literally be a blog post, just written content. Or it could be a fully interactive piece. It could be anything within that. So that's what I kind of say. Assetless, there's nothing a journalist could link to. And content-led, there is something a journalist could link. So yeah.
Right. No, I like that. Do you think is one better for homepage links versus like where does those two strategies where do those play into kind of the end, like the KPIs of a goal? Like,
yeah,
would you lean into one versus the other for different scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, so potentially. I mean, I think it's probably fair to say if there is nothing for the journalist to link to, the most obvious place for them to link to will be the homepage. So it's there's kind of a bit of it's almost like by default, right? By default, most of the time, I think when you're doing digital PR without an asset, most of the time what you'll get is a homepage link. But that's not always true, right? Like I've definitely seen examples in the past where essentially it's a reactive piece of PR, but it's linked to a product. So, for example, my friends at Yard Digital many moons ago did a reactive bit of PR. I think it was based on, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but it doesn't really matter. I think it was based on a necklace that Victoria Beckham wore to her son's wedding or something. So, this is heavy journalism, very serious journalism. Victoria Beckham wore a necklace to her son's wedding. And what this jewelry company did, this Yard were working, I should have said this at the beginning. Yard were working for this jewelry company. And what this jewelry company, what they did was they got the expert from the jewelry company to value the necklace that Victoria Beckham was wearing. Very nice. It cost an awful lot of money. I don't know how much, but they've got plenty of money, so that's fine. And then the other cute thing that they did, which I thought was really nice, was highlight a bunch of, I don't want to say knockoff, because they're not knockoff, but like similar necklaces that you could buy if you didn't have, Victoria Beckham's, credit rating. And so what I thought was really nice about this story was that it was a bit of reactive PR. It was assetless. Do you know what I mean? They didn't have anything live on the client's site, but what they'd done was kind of connect the dots. So by providing the journalist with a valuation for Victoria Beckham's necklace, the journalist was then also seemingly pretty happy to talk about the other necklaces that this particular jewelry company had on offer. And so they got a link, if I recall correctly, not just to the homepage. I think they actually got two links. They got one to the homepage, kind of as their like, this jewelry company's spokesperson, blah, that was linked to the homepage. And then they also linked to this page of similar necklaces to Victoria Beckham's, or a couple of different, it may have been a couple of different product pages. And so I think it's worth saying that assetless PR can do that too. It doesn't always, right? Like I always feel like, I feel like a technical SEO. Everything I say winds up being, it depends. But there is a bit of an it depends in there, right? There's a bit of an it depends in there. And so I think, yes. So assetless digital PR often results in links to the homepage. And depending on the nature of the assetless digital PR, may also result in links to product pages, if that's relevant, or category pages in some instances, if that is relevant. And I feel like that's like broadly true. Now, obviously, you might argue, well, if they're linking to a product page or a category page, is it truly assetless digital PR?
Right,
At which point, I'm just going to lose my
Semantics.
mind. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know. I can't tell you.
Yeah.
I'm not clever enough. But yeah, so yes, in short, sometimes that'll result in that. I think but I also think I think it's often the case, again, not always the case, when you do like hero or content-led digital PR, that often results in links direct to that piece of content that you have created. But again, not always, right? I've definitely been in a situation where despite in the media pitch, I've asked, if you'd like to use this story, please credit. Here's the link to this beautiful piece of content that my team have created. And instead, the journalist has linked to the homepage. And in those instances, I do nothing at all. I'm not going to be, like going to the journalist and saying, please, can you change this link? Like, that's just not my jam. I'm like, it's fine. It's fine. I have appropriate credit.
Right.
Like, and yeah, I wouldn't start, bothering them. I think they have enough to do without updating links to pieces that they've very kindly written.
I feel like in the US, at least for smaller, like local news, you can kind of get away with that sometimes.
Yeah.
If they link to, the homepage and you really want them to link to, but like from an SEO perspective, like a homepage link is usually probably better, even especially if you're making some like content specific post. If you're thinking from like how you're going to impact rankings, like a link to the homepage is probably better than some link to a blog post, in terms of like lifting up product page rankings or something.
Yeah. And I do think like all of this stuff, again, we wind up in slight, like it depends territory. Like my feeling on the whole thing is honestly like, the thing that I would be most interested in is contextual relevance. So if you're mentioning my brand and I've not given you anything to link to, I've given you no like research or study to link to, it contextually makes the most sense for you to link to my homepage, and I'm totally comfortable with that. If I've sent you a particular product and you're talking about a particular product I sell, probably contextually it makes more sense for you to link that product. But yeah, I wouldn't be tied up in knots over this stuff. I don't think it's worthwhile. Genuinely. I think people get too worried.
I agree. Yeah. And if you're an agency talking about this stuff, I think it's important to kind of set some of those expectations in the beginning. Like we might not get 10 links or whatever it is to this specific piece. We're talking about overall, and the more kind of broad goals and KPIs that you can set, I think the better off you are, because then you kind of cover your bases. If it is like they want you to create a digital PR campaign to help something rank, like talk about organic traffic as the main driver, or like a lift in the organic traffic or rankings for that post, but also talk about the potential link benefits. So
I think I'm also
the more
like
kind of areas you can touch, the better.
I think also like I'm just pretty mercenary about this stuff. I'm like, do you know what? Like my job as the PR is to get you linked coverage. You want improved rankings? That's a technical SEO problem, right? If your site architecture is so messy that you're not able to like, do you know what you're not able to like channel that authority. If you're not able to channel that authority appropriately, like, it's not really for me. I'm not best placed to tell you how to optimize your site architecture. What you want to do is speak to a technical SEO. I have many friends who are technical SEOs. I can put you in touch with someone. Yeah.
Have you been in that situation where like you're getting links, you're getting great coverage, and the client is like, hey, this isn't doing XYZ that we thought it would do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think part of it is because I've been doing this long enough now. That honestly, like a bunch of this has changed genuinely. So like, I feel reasonably confident in saying like there was a point in time, like say back in 2010, 2011, something like that, where essentially like if you got enough good, high authority editorial links from like, major news outlets, rankings would improve, even if technically the site was not that great, right? So like, even if like pages were imperfectly optimized, even if maybe the site architecture wasn't that great, maybe even if there was a bit of duplicate content issues going on, like actually, if you could do enough good PR and generate, as they say, generate some really high quality linked coverage, you would see rankings improve. And of course, what's happened is over time that's changed. That's genuinely changed. And I've definitely been in situations where like we're doing, objectively great work for this client, but their rankings aren't moving. And I think that sometimes, certainly in some circumstances, it's been as simple as, look, you said that you had this technical stuff sorted, but like you don't. Your site's not indexed. Large chunks of your site aren't indexed. So, this particular page that you want to see ranking improvement for, it gets not indexed. So, this is not something this isn't something I can help you with, right? This is a technical issue. But there's definitely that. I think the other thing that people often don't, perhaps don't fully consider is that, none of what we do happens in a vacuum. So, for example, if you were in a very competitive niche, so like something like insurance, for example, insurance is a very competitive niche. Even if you were doing really, really great work for your insurance aggregator client, it's probably true to say that there are a whole bunch of other agencies or internal teams doing really great work for their different insurance aggregator clients. And at a certain point, there's something in velocity, right? So if another player in the space, if a competitor in your space is investing 2, 3, 4, 5 times the amount of resource into this activity, and therefore building 2, 3, 4, 5 times the amount of linked coverage as us, like it doesn't matter. You're still not going to go anywhere because someone else is still someone else is doing better than you. And I think that's also a factor that maybe sometimes people kind of don't consider. And we sort of we'll sort of talk about competitor analysis, but actually in my experience, very few agencies track things like the link velocity of their competitor. So like we're all doing digital PR now, but have you looked to see like what their velocity looks like versus yours? I think the other thing as well that sometimes people kind of don't necessarily consider is that a lot of what we're doing is like running really fast just to stay in the same place. So I feel like, you probably, like people don't like me saying this out loud, and that's fine. I don't mind that. But like you probably, if you're in a very competitive niche, you probably ought to be doing an amount of digital PR activity just to stay in the same place. So just to stay, for example, at position 5 for a set of competitive keywords, you probably need to be doing an amount of digital PR activity just to stay there. And if you did less, you'd actually see yourselves dropping. And again, this is something which isn't necessarily kind of taken into account. And I recognize that this stuff is, this stuff is difficult. Like it's much nicer to work in a niche where you you do some good work and the clients' rankings improve and everyone's like high-fiving. But it's like, you know what, if you're in a competitive niche, that's the absolute dream. But if you're in a competitive niche or if there are technical issues with the site, like that just will not be the case. That won't be the case. Everybody is running really fast at the moment.
Yeah. No, and I think there is probably some truth to the idea that like Google looks at different industries in different ways and weights different signals in different industries in different ways.
Yeah, definitely. And I think particularly for stuff like, I love using the example of insurance because the truth of the matter is that like one person's car insurance page is no better than any other person's car insurance page, right? Like that they're not.
Once you get to the top, especially, like all of them look the same.
Yeah, they all look the same. They all do the same thing. it probably doesn't matter actually in real terms, like which car insurance aggregator that you go with. It doesn't matter. You're going to get like the same levels of service. You're probably even going to get the same insurance product, right? From all of these different people. And so I think in spaces like that, I think really it's possible at least that, you know, it's like Google can't be relying on like on-page stuff at that point, right? Like, because everybody's page is well optimized. Everybody's page is, you know, like reasonably fast. It works well on mobile, is accessible. So all of those baseline, like, oh, I don't like the word hygiene, but do you know what I mean? Like those kind of like basic SEO hygiene stuff.
Yeah.
It's like tick, tick, tick. And so then Google still have to decide, well, someone's got to be first, someone second, someone third, someone fourth. How do they decide? Probably it's something that looks like brand. And how do you decide who is a brand and who isn't online? Probably some of the stuff that looks like digital PR plays into that. I think.
Yes. No, I totally agree with you. Hannah, thank you so much. I don't want to take up any more of your time, and like you're dumping all this great info here. You are a consultant, so like you should be, you know, shouldn't be giving this all. Check out Hannah at worderist.com. Again, I'll link to all this stuff in the show notes, but she has a great blog there with digital PR, strategy, everything, you know, the intersection of all the industries that she's worked in the past 14 years. So
now we've got that right.
Again,
now we've checked.
Yeah. Knocked it down. Yeah.
Oh.
If y'all like what you hear, please, you know, subscribe to the BuzzStream podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a like, thumbs up, comment. Let us know if you have any questions for Hannah, for me. We love talking about this stuff, obviously. So thanks again for listening.